Hello, welcome to the Call for Justice training at the United Way 211 Ceridian offices in Bloomington, Minnesota. I am Ellie Krug, the Executive Director of Call for Justice, and today we're going to do a bit of a review of what our training was, of some key takeaways, what I'm calling the top 10 takeaways of our training from the past 16 months. This training really is focusing on some legal resources, but more of it will be about our key methodologies for dealing with legal referrals. And so over the last 16 months, we've done a total of 13 trainings on a number of different topics. This is training number 14 for us. And we've covered everything from the basics about the civil legal system to landlord-tenant law, to bankruptcy law that was most recently, to elder law, domestic survivors of domestic abuse and those legal resources and social service resources for them. And so we've covered quite the panoply. And what we want to do today is just sort of try and tie everything together before we take our summer break and try and catch our breath a little bit about everything that we've done. So in your materials, you have a written material that I'm calling Ellie's Top 10 Takeaways. And it's named that because I couldn't think of anything else to call it. So, one of the things that we have tried to stress in our training from the beginning is the idea that when you make your referrals, that you make at least 2 referrals, that there be one primary referral, something that will put somebody in contact with a potential legal provider where they can actually provide legal advice. And then what I call a fallback I call it a fallback referral, which is designed to help give the caller some quick ability to get a handle on what their legal issue is, what is the legal problem that they're confronting. The fallback referral won't necessarily give them the ability to talk to a human being, although some of the fallbacks that we'll talk about will. But more importantly, it's about getting, I'm envisioning the caller at 7:30 at night who's come home from working, who gets a letter in the mail, which may be the 6th or 7th letter, but finally the letter that they pay attention to, that essentially says, you are being sued, or you have been sued for some period of time, and now we're going to take money out of your bank account, or whatever. So I'm envisioning the caller that is panicking and who's needing some kind of reassurance. So much of our training has dealt with those primary referrals, the one of the 2 that you're going to make. For example, to legal aid, or to the Ramsey County Bar Association for a legal referral, or to Volunteer Lawyers Network. Those would be primary referrals. On the fallback side, though, let's go back and just refresh ourselves about what those fallbacks are and why it might be significant to provide those. So one of the things that we've trained on early on and repeatedly is the lawhelpmn.org site, which has everyone in the room gone to it at least to see what it's like? So, okay, and even just not anyway. And so, from going to the site that it has at least a dozen separate categories that a caller somebody visiting the site can click on: landlord-tenant, consumer protection, bankruptcy, immigrant issues, just the whole, really, much of what we've covered in our training, and that the viewer can click and then get several things all at once. They can get what are called legal papers or white papers on a particular legal topic. They can get social service resources connected with that. So if somebody is having a landlord-tenant issue, they can also find social service providers that will help them with temporary housing. and then they can get legal providers. And so what our hope is that by at least referring them to law help, they'll be able to, at 8 o'clock at night, when nobody's going to be open, there'll be no legal provider that will be open at that time, that they can at least learn some things about what their rights are, maybe a little bit about their obligations, and perhaps a little bit about what the consequences may be if they don't act. So, and in our training paper here, we have provided, we've gone back over and refreshed on what are the various fallback referrals. So I've already talked about law help, which of course all that a caller needs is the ability to get on the internet. With 60% of human beings in the world owning smartphones, and the other 40% getting ready to own them in the next month, you know, the internet is not that far away for anyone. But other fallback referrals, the state court self-help centers. And recall that the state court self-help centers, and for those who are viewing this video at the Call for Justice website, you can go to our website and access each and every one of our training papers, including the one that I'm reading from right now. So I'm not going to repeat phone numbers during the course of this video, but you can go to the website and view or download our training papers. They're open, they're available to the public, and you can get the phone numbers. So because your reach with United Way 211 in the Twin Cities also reaches across the state, it's important to remember that the state court self-help centers is organized across the state. Anyone can access the state court self-help center website from a computer. If they don't have a computer, there are, at each of the 87 courthouses in the state of Minnesota, there are computers and telephones. A computer and a monitor and a telephone right next to it where they can communicate with the central state court self-help center, which happens to be located in Minneapolis, which is staffed by attorneys whom will not provide legal advice, but who will help people navigate the system, tell them what to expect. And one of the things we heard in yesterday's training, which I thought was a phenomenal word, which we have not used enough, which is process. You know, that somebody who's involved in the legal system with being sued, or we've got an eviction issue or whatever, it's all a process. There is a process that they need to understand. There's a begin point, a middle point, and an end point for every legal controversy involving every person. So the court self-help centers will help explain what that process is. And remember, we all know this, that information is very powerful. It helps people to be able to get their bearings. Other fallback referrals. In Hennepin County, there is a self-help center and in the government center building on the main floor where somebody can actually go and don't need a telephone for that. You can actually talk to a live body. There is a family court self-help center in Hennepin County at the Family Justice Center on 4th Street where somebody can go and get self-help assistance. In Ramsey County, at the Ramsey County Law Library, there is a self-help center. And the law librarians at the Ramsey County Law Library, as at many of our metro area law libraries, are very helpful. I'll come back to that in a second. But in Ramsey County, the law library is located on the 15th floor of the courthouse. There is also a Ramsey County Family Court Self-Help Center located in the Juvenile and Family Justice Center on West 7th Street. So all of these resources are fallbacks. So as you're making your primary referral, please always couple it with a fallback referral. And I have given you some potential script at the back of the training material about asking people, take pen and paper out, and I'm going to give you 2 referrals. First one, explain. The first one, it may, remember, do not say will, but may put them in contact with an attorney who can provide them with legal advice. But the fallback referral, and by the way, calling here is a second referral that you will be able to get some information, not advice, but information that will assist you in understanding your legal situation. Okay, any questions so far? And by the way, just raise your hand and make comments or questions as I go forward. I don't bite. Okay, well, at least not today. The people, your colleagues yesterday thought maybe I did a little bit with our role playing. We don't need to go there. Okay, so the second point that I've made in our takeaway is what I'm calling the 3 Ps. Persistence, patience, and preparation. And why are those important? Because in many instances, you may be the last professional human being somebody talks to before they end up going and actually speaking to a legal professional. And we know from just human nature, we know from work situations, we know from our teenagers that people don't always think ahead as to what it is that they're going to, what's coming up. And so you are in a very unique position to be able to remind people about certain things. And I'm not suggesting, I know that your time on the calls are limited, and I'm not suggesting that we're spending, 15 minutes going through an airline checklist, okay? But I am suggesting that it is important for you to explain to somebody, you may only get 15 minutes with a legal professional. That may be all that you get to deal with your legal problem. And so, if that's the case, what do? Make sure that you bring along every piece of paper that relates to your legal situation. And for example, if there are photographs involved, if you have a landlord-tenant issue and there's an issue about the sink not working or the toilet is flooding or whatever, and you have photographs of that, bring those along. They can be very important. One other thing that we've heard on our side, on the legal side, is that when people take photos with their cell phones, the cell phone photos are no good. They can't be used in court because they can't be marked as evidence. When you have a hearing, you have to have exhibits, and you have to be able to share those exhibits with the other attorney, and you can't do that by passing the cell phone around. Yes?
So they would have to print out the pictures?
They'd have to print out the photos.
Okay.
Yep. So similarly, if they've got documents, on their phone, same thing. They've got to print out what those are. So just FYI, and I think that's just a good reminder, because we are a society where we take photos, we think that's good enough, just show somebody our cell phone. That does not work in a courtroom. So make sure that one of the things is you're talking to somebody, and I am assuming, you guys do a really great job. So I'm assuming you're getting their anxiety level down a little bit as you're speaking to them. So that's, throw in to them, not with all the callers, but, some of them, some of them just yell at you, I know. Bring every document relating to it, bring every photograph that relates to it. We've heard from some of our legal providers that writing up a summary, having something written up before you go and talk to the legal professional could be very helpful. And in part that's helpful because that gets the person in legal need to focus and to concentrate on what it is their problem. And so, that's the kind of thing you can just say in 10 seconds, But on the persistence, that's the preparation side. So I'm going backwards. So on the persistence side, I think that it's important that we do remind our callers that this isn't easy. There is no, in criminal court, remember we went through our criminal law training several months ago. In the criminal arena, for the most part, if you're at risk of losing your liberty, of going to jail, you're entitled to have a lawyer. On the civil side, unfortunately, we don't have a system that guarantees anybody the right to an attorney if you're at risk of losing your housing, or if you're at risk of losing your job, or your medical benefits, or your key family relationships, or if you're at risk of being killed by a partner. We don't guarantee lawyers for that. And so hopefully someday that will change. But right now, it doesn't. And it's very important that as you're communicating with your callers, that you remind them that there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to talk to an attorney. Because I know that we get callers that say, I want my pro bono lawyer, or that essentially communicate to you that they believe that they have the right to a pro bono lawyer, and where do I find that lawyer? It doesn't exist. That right does not exist in our system, and it's important. I think it is crucial that you remind the callers of that, and that you let them know that this is can at best be a hit or miss system, and that's where that persistence comes into play. To remind the callers that they need to be their own best advocate, and that means that if they get no in terms of an eligibility question. Now, that is different from a lawyer saying, you know what, you don't have a case, okay? The barking dog case, the barking dog is 6 blocks away, and you're the only human being that can hear it on your street, that's probably not going to be a legal case for someone, all right? That's a real extreme example, but it's the only one I can come up with at the moment. So that is different. That no is different from hearing somebody be told, our eligibility requirements are that you have to be at 150 or 200% of federal poverty guidelines, and you happen to be at 220%. Okay? That is a different kind of no. Because if they're persistent, they very well may be able to find a lawyer that's going to be willing to work with them at 220% of the federal poverty guidelines. Now, your ability to explain that over a telephone call may be limited, and I understand that. But that kind of no is the kind that needs to be met with persistence on the part of the caller. And so if you're viewing this video and you heard me just say that, you need to understand if you're turned down for an eligibility reason, not because your case doesn't have merit, all right, or on a legal basis you're sunk. For example, if you haven't paid the rent for 6 months and you're the subject of an eviction proceeding, the chances are that you're not going to have much of a legal defense. So, although maybe you might, so maybe it still pays for you to be persistent about trying to find an attorney. But it means that the callers need to really be their own advocates. And what do I mean by persistence? I mean, okay, you talk to somebody on the telephone at agency A, they've told you that you're screened out because you make too much money, you know that you can't afford a full-time lawyer, a lawyer out of the regular bar, then that means persistent-wise, you need to go look for another attorney through another agency or another vehicle. It may mean being on the telephone with someone is not going to be good enough, and it may mean that you have to go in person to a particular place. For example, we know about the legal access point in Hennepin County, that anybody can go to the legal access point clinic. On some days when the Hennepin County Bar Association staffs it with their lawyers, there are no income requirements, no income limits. On other days when VLN lawyers staff it, there are income requirements of up to, is it 200 or 300%? Do you remember, Jillian?
300.
300%. But again, it's about being persistent, and you have to be your own best advocate. Many people are intimidated by the system, and that is just too frightening a concept, but not everyone is. So, also, the third P, bless you.
Thank you.
The third P is about patience. And what does that mean? That means because there aren't enough pro bono lawyers to go around, or low bono. Pro bono, remember, are lawyers that don't charge for their time. Low bono lawyers are lawyers who charge for a very low rate. They still charge, but that rate is way below what other lawyers regularly charge. Patience means that because there is not enough lawyers to go around for everyone, that what a caller has to do, a person in legal need has to do, is to adjust for that. That means waiting in line. That means waiting on the telephone to be able to speak to somebody. That means, for example, recall on our bankruptcy training from last month, that VLN, if they accept your bankruptcy case, they may not be able to schedule you to talk to a lawyer for 2 months. That's patience. And it's, I think, for many people, yours truly included, it's very hard to be patient when you have a pressing emotional need going on. And so, but if the alternative is to not get the legal resource versus being patient and waiting for it, please be patient and wait for it. So you can explain that to your callers as well. Any questions anybody have so far? Okay, all right. And you're all still awake. I'm really impressed. Okay. And some of these I'm just going to breeze through fairly quickly here. Remember, we have talked about the difference between full representation and brief legal advice. Back in 1914, when I got my law degree, lawyers were obligated, if a client came in the door, lawyers were obligated to represent somebody from the beginning to the end of the legal situation. So that meant that the lawyer was tied to the client regardless of where the legal situation was leading to. Because there are not enough lawyers doing pro bono or low bono work, the legal system has adjusted to that, thankfully. And so now the legal system has what is called various terms. One is unbundled service, another is called brief advice. We'll use the phrase brief advice, which allows lawyers to actually meet with a client for as little as 10 or 15 minutes to look at a document or listen to the client about a legal situation, and then to offer advice to the client or to help draft a document that takes as little as 10 minutes, give it to the client, give the advice to the client, and then the lawyer can be done. Lawyer does not need to do anything further, and they've fulfilled their ethical obligations to the client. You know, and the idea, of course, is because there aren't enough lawyers, a little bit of advice is better than no advice. So, and I think it's helpful when you're on your calls to remind the callers about that there is such a thing, that a lawyer will meet with you, but it may only be, we're back to that thing again, it may only be for 10 or 15 minutes. And, but it may be important legal advice. That also, I forgot to mention something about that preparation part, which is to remind the callers to bring pen and paper. You know, I mean, this is really basic stuff, but to bring something to write down what the notes are, you know, to make notes of what the lawyer tells you. As well as, and this is far, far more common, as well as if they don't understand what the lawyer tells them, is saying to them, because lawyers sometimes, I know this will come as a shock, but lawyers sometimes have a difficult time talking to people. Okay? They can talk pretty well to other lawyers, but to human beings, it's a little different. Oh, lawyers are human beings. Okay, well, anyway, so I think that non-lawyers become intimidated when they talk to lawyers. And then lawyers start using all these legal phrases like res judicata or summary judgment or whatever. I've just exhausted all the phrases I know. And, you know, and then people, they're intimidated, they don't ask, and then they walk away. And unfortunately, they can walk away more confused after speaking with the lawyer than when before. So, you know, I don't think it hurts at all for you to remind your callers that if you talk to the lawyer and you don't understand what the lawyer has to say, just tell the lawyer that and say, could you say it a different way to me, please? I don't understand. This requires a bit of persistence and advocate, you know, being your own self-advocate again. So, on the brief advice thing, I think that this is particularly a risk with brief legal advice because the lawyer is under a time clock. They want to move on to the next client who needs low bono or pro bono advice, pro bono services. So the lawyer is pushing to make sure that they service as many clients as possible. And the person who is in legal need, you know, feels this pressure to get everything all at once. Well, but if you're not understanding what you're being told, it doesn't do you any good. So, all right, so remember that. Okay, item 4 on our outline is about the 5 core legal needs. Hopefully, this is not the first time you're hearing this because we've been trying to stress it as much as possible in all of our trainings. And although I think more recently I was able to synthesize this into one basic rule. And so, remember, when the 5 core legal needs are at risk, shelter, landlord-tenant, or foreclosures for some low-income people, safety, domestic violence, or harassment involving a threat of personal safety, employment benefits such as unemployment or back wage claims, access to medical benefits for MFIP or Medicare or Medicaid, and key family relationships. Now that would be divorces or family law disputes where children are at issue, particularly the ability for one to see one's child. Those types of core legal needs are good referrals. Right off the bat, good referrals to legal aid. And you know, I use the phrase legal aid to encompass all our legal aid organizations in the state of Minnesota, as well as to the VLN or to Tubman. You know, it's an issue involving safety or homelessness, shelter for somebody who has left an abuser. Okay, Tubman, right away. You know, it gets pretty rote, just do it. Or some of the other, I mean, we've also made some other referrals in our training on domestic violence. But those are automatic good referrals. And again, of course, we want our fallback referrals after that. So anybody we've talked about this before, so I won't dwell on it, but anybody have any questions about this takeaway? No? Okay. Let me get a drink of water. So let's move on then to item number 5. Contingent fee cases go to the Hennepin County Bar Association lawyer referral information service, or to the Ramsey County Attorney Referral Service. That is a pretty basic, good referral as well. So what is a contingent fee case? It is any case in which someone believes that somebody else or a company or a business of some type owes them money as a result of some dispute. So, or that in some way they've suffered some other kind of harm as the result of somebody else with a dispute. So let's go back to our dog case, okay? So let's assume that the barking dog is not 6 blocks away, because God knows I would hear that. But let's assume that the barking dog is next door, okay? And so I'm going to give you 3 scenarios. The very first scenario is that the barking dog is just barking and waking you up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you can't go to, you know, it's affecting your sleep, you're no good at work, et cetera, all right? That kind of caller, would that be a legal aid call, do you think? Does it involve something that's a core basic need? No. Barking dogs are not core basic needs. However, that barking dog may constitute a nuisance. That's a legal concept. And that may entitle the person listening to the barking dog the right to go to court to ask a judge to say the dog's either got to be dealt with in a different way by the neighbor, or the dog has to be removed. All right? That could also mean that they go to the city and complain, or they call the police and complain. Those are kinds of resources, but from a legal standpoint, they may have the right to go do that. So, and if they say they have no money to afford an attorney to do that, then send them to the self-help center. People at the self-help center will explain to them how you fill out the paperwork for a small claims action where you can claim that there's this barking dog next door. That person filling it out doesn't even have to write the word nuisance, but somebody at the self-help center will say what you're talking about is a nuisance, and so that they get help. Okay, second scenario. Let's assume that the person goes over to the house next door, knocks on the door to complain about the barking dog, and then the barking dog jumps through the screen and bites them. Okay? All right. Now, how does that change the scenario from nuisance to this? What is it about that changes that?
There's Potential injury.
Injury, right, okay? And they've been harmed as a result of somebody, maybe the screen is no good, whatever, or why didn't they have a chain on the dog inside the house? I don't know, And so, but as a result of that, now they may be entitled to money. And that is an automatic, just send them on to the Hennepin or the Ramsey County Bar Associations for a referral to what would be called a plaintiff lawyer. Okay, let them evaluate that, but that don't even, you can still give them a fallback, give them something on Law Help or the Court Self-Help Center, but that is what's called a contingent case. Okay, so now let's go to the third scenario, all right? And I'm going to just change it just a little bit. Let's assume that it's a barking dog, but it's in the neighborhood, and you don't know whose dog it is. And you go out, and the caller goes out and sees the dog on the sidewalk, and the dog's barking, and the caller tries to do the thing that we human beings like to do, which is like, oh, come on, quit barking, be nice, and the dog shuts up. And the caller bends down to pet the dog, and then the dog bites the caller on the cheek. Okay, actually, we got a call earlier this week about something very similar to this, all right? And so, all right, so in that scenario, but we don't know whose dog it is, okay? And the caller has to go to the hospital to have medical attention, but the caller also doesn't have medical benefits. They don't have insurance, okay? So I'm watching Brenda. Brenda's like, now this is getting complicated. Okay, so in that scenario, let's think about it. Is it a contingent fee case? Maybe, but we don't know because we don't know who owns the dog. All right? Is it? It would be a safety issue. I mean, let's assume the caller's already been to you after the hospital, so they're dealing with the rabies issue, whatever that may be. Okay? But it's the medical benefits issue on this scenario that I'm really trying to get at. Okay? It's somebody who does not have health insurance, has had medical, needs. They're going to be getting a bill from the emergency room for $10,000. And so how do we deal with that? That probably would be a legal aid, assuming, income guidelines. But that probably would be at least a legal aid referral. And let legal aid sort that out as to whether that's something they can help them with. That's about as clear as I can make all of the distinctions. But does that help understand, a little bit about how these things work differently? So the contingent fee cases, are really, I'm happy about, because the training has been brilliant, but what I'm happy about is that we can discern some really good bright line rules through our training. And that contingent fee thing is one of those bright line rules, all right? So let's get, anybody have any questions about that? I've given you some tips about what words to look for, what catchphrases to look for that'll help, help with contingent fee. I mean, like sue, the word sue, hey, okay, and do you guys get callers where they're actually saying, I want to sue someone?
Sometimes here and there.
Probably getting more callers saying, I'm being sued. So, okay, all right, so let's go back, then let's go to another bright line, referral. And that would be, remember when Martha Delaney came in and talked from Legal Volunteer Lawyers Network, Spanish-speaking callers send to Lored. Pretty simple, And why would we do that versus, I know that we have some Spanish-speaking INR folks on staff, which is quite wonderful, but why would we send them to Lored rather than to try and sort out what their legal needs are, using our Spanish-speaking INR folks? The reason is that legal terminology may have different meanings in Spanish than in English. And my desire, our Call for Justice's request would be send them to Lored because Lored is schooled in how those legal phrases should be used. So, and if you've got a caller that's asking in Spanish something that may be very technical relating to a legal matter, let's let somebody who's dealing with that regularly, those legal matters, be able to speak with the caller. I mean, certainly what our Spanish-speaking INR folks can do are all the other things that we've talked about. The patience, the preparation, the persistence, because the Spanish-speaking caller may still encounter all of those issues. They may still have issues about brief legal advice. They may still have issues about eligibility. You know, so it's not simply, oh, hello, and here's the referral. I mean, our Spanish-speaking INR folks can sort of set the stage. All of you are gatekeepers, exceedingly important gatekeepers, but you can set the stage for the caller on how to go and perceive and deal with the system. But you know, pretty bright line rule. Spanish-speaking callers, let's get to the red. All right? Any questions? We're sailing through here. Okay, so let's go on to takeaway number 7, which happens to be one of my very favorite takeaways because we have not talked, I mean, we have talked, please, about the law libraries. And in fact, we've had some law librarians come that are legal liaisons through the Call for Justice Legal Liaison Program, but we've had some of those liaison librarians here. But this is, in our view, one of the most underutilized and understood legal resources in the state. We have provided on our list, so if you're listening to this on our website, again, go to the training paper, and that would be training paper number 14. And on page 4 to 5 of the training paper, we list the 7 metro area law libraries, which are staffed by human beings. You know, all of the law librarians are lawyers. They've got Juris Doctor, they've got law degrees. And we know that librarians generally, what are they? They are eager to help. There's a reason people become law librarians. They want to share knowledge and information. And our metro area law librarians, many of whom are legal liaisons, are among the smartest, most helpful, most motivated people to help other people. Now, do they provide legal advice? Nope, they can't do that. However, will they help somebody navigate the system? Will they help explain that process that we talked about, that I talked about before? They will, okay? And the odds of being able to get a chunk of time with a law librarian are pretty good. You know, I mean, because they're underutilized, they don't have people waiting in line. I mean, many of the law libraries operate clinics at various times where they bring in lawyers from the outside who can provide legal advice. And if you go, remember on our Call for Justice website, we list legal clinics that take place through the metro area, and we list them by topic. Not by date, but by topic, which is, I think, very helpful. So the law librarian, somebody goes to the law library, they will be able to get somebody to talk to that will actually, more likelihood than not, be able to spend the amount of required time that it takes for somebody to understand something in terms of process. So, so we highly recommend that you utilize the law libraries, as they would again be a fallback referral. They would not be a primary because they can't provide legal advice. Primary are only legal advice oriented resources, but these are very important fallback referrals. Any questions? Okay.
I have a quick question just about the law libraries.
Yep.
Is the materials that you get like easy for a non-lawyer to understand, or is it very, expertise like?
No, the law library is geared to this kind of aspect of the law library are geared toward non-lawyers. So you'll get, almost all of the written materials, and some of them are prepared by legal aid, and then they show up in different places, but all of the legal aid materials are geared toward sixth grade education. So no one is looking for anyone to have any particular expertise.
Ellie, just as a little, as I know somebody who was very successful with a lawsuit going through, who was not a lawyer, using the law libraries. He was injured at work, was going through a lot of rehab, so wasn't working, and spent pretty much most of his days, maybe 6 months worth over at the Billy Mitchell Law Library, sued the employer without an attorney and got compensation, in 6 figures. This was 20 years ago, because he didn't want to pay a lawyer. He figured he could do this, and he did all of the research about this kind of injury. What do you get? What's the standard thing? What do I have to look for? And he won.
No, it's,
It took a long time, but
It does.
And persistence, patience and persistence, and if you're willing to do it.
It does, and that law library, when you talk about William Mitchell, is actually the law school law library, and those are other resources which we don't even have listed on this, in part because these law librarians that are on this list are geared towards serving the public, whereas the William Mitchell Law Library, and good for your friend to be able to.
It was my cousin.
Okay, good for your cousin. But the law libraries at Hamlin and William Mitchell and St. Thomas and the U, while certainly the public is welcome, they are geared towards assisting law students. But what you say is true. What Lael just described is what's called pro se. That is somebody going through a court process by themselves. And for our viewers, the statistics on pro se litigants are staggering. In Hennepin County in 2012, over 80% of the people going through family court are pro se, where neither has a lawyer. And so, yes, Ann?
Just based on the rate of success that you just said, do you think the judge takes into any consideration, okay, this person is representing themselves, and kind of puts a filter on maybe their inability to maybe successfully communicate some things? Is there? Do you think there's a, you know what I mean? Kind of
Yeah,
like the way the judge
is there
would
some
look?
safety factor built into it?
Right,
Some
yeah.
handicapping
Yeah.
in favor of the unrepresented litigant?
Yeah.
That is a really complicated answer. Some of it is judge-specific, but the reality is that the judge can't favor anyone, because the judge is supposed to be impartial
Right,
to
yeah.
all the parties. And many judges believe that the failure to have attorneys for folks going through the system, in the end, results in endings that are not as favorable to those people compared to if they had lawyers. And so it's an unfortunate result when people can't connect with lawyers, because I think people do suffer when they do. And to use Lael's example about her cousin, that is the rare case where somebody is willing to be able to spend the time and have the acumen, the intelligence to understand the entire process. And
We're Scottish, so we didn't want to pay that.
yeah, Scottish, there you go. Okay. Although remember, on the contingent fee cases, the fee for the lawyer is taken out of what the lawyer recovers on behalf of the person who believes they're entitled to money. And maybe I should have said that right up the front. So, back to our second dog bite case. If the second dog scenario, if the dog bite situation doesn't result in them recovering any money, the lawyer doesn't take a fee out of that. So the lawyer doesn't get paid. There are some expenses, and I don't want to get into the esoteric issue about expenses versus fees, but the lawyer would not take any money for their fee. So that's the great thing about contingent fee cases, because the good news is that if you don't get any money, you don't have to pay the lawyer. The bad news is that if you do get money, the lawyer might take 35 or 40% of whatever the recovery is. But for many people, giving up 35 or 40% is a lot better because they would not, because they've done so much better with the lawyer versus as if they don't have an attorney. So I would never counsel anyone to go through the legal system without a lawyer if there is a lawyer available for them. If they can if they can afford a lawyer, and frankly, one of the realities is that many people believe that they're entitled to free lawyers, as we talked before, to pro bono lawyers, and because despite the fact that they may have resources to pay for an attorney. And I have this saying, nobody goes to an auto mechanic to have their engine worked on and believe that when they're done that they don't owe the mechanic anything, the mechanic should do it for free. I mean, no one does that. No one calls the plumber up and says, come on over to my house, and tear out my toilet because it's leaking, or unplug my sink, and then at the end say, well, you're going to do this for free, right? And believe me, there are many people, many people who don't have the resources to pay for attorneys. But there are also many people who do have resources, who can pay for lawyers, but who decide that they're not going to because they believe they're entitled to free attorneys. And in the end, they hurt themselves that way. They absolutely hurt themselves because not having a lawyer does affect the outcome of your legal situation. It does. It's a reality. Okay, any other questions? All right, so item 8. Eighth number takeaway is always stress avoiding legal emergencies. I think we talked about this within the first 15 minutes of our training on training 1. So you're going to get callers who are going to call you and say, I've got this piece of paper that says that they may garnish my bank account, or I have this piece of paper from the landlord who says there's some problem here about his loan with the bank, and there may be a problem with foreclosure of this apartment building I'm in. Those are legal problems. And what we want to do is we want to stress, deal with that legal problem now before it becomes a legal emergency. On the apartment dweller, if they ignore it, they could end up getting a notice that the building's being foreclosed upon, and guess what? They're going to need to move in 2 months. Whereas if they dealt with it proactively, they may have been able to have a say in how the situation comes down, and they may have been able to work out a deal where they could stay 6 months instead of 2 months. And so we want to, and again, you can do this. You guys have the time on the telephone to just throw it in and just say, look, this is a really important thing. You need to deal with this before it melts down, before you have no choices. Because when legal emergencies arise, the thing that happens is that people lose choices. They lose their ability and their flexibility to deal with the legal situation to their benefit, or to make it at least somewhat better. So, pretty basic. Okay. Item 9, some legal resources are less effective. And you are the ones who are hearing about those resources. And what we want, if you can, is to communicate that to us. How do you know the resources aren't being effective? Now, I'm not talking about, people getting screened out on eligibility requirements, but I am talking about, you gave me a number, I tried to call it, all it did is ring, 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 and it was during the hours that you said that they would be answering their telephone. There wasn't even an answering machine that would pick up, or I went to this clinic that you told me about. And you know what? They were so disorganized. They didn't have any lawyers there. They didn't know. They said that they moved the hours, or they're only doing it once a month instead of every 3 weeks. 3 times a month. Those kinds of things we want to learn about, because that will give us an opportunity to do 2 things. One is for us to investigate, call for justice, to go out and talk to that legal provider. Something that we have done to determine how their program is working, and maybe for us to understand some better nuances about it. But the other thing that Call for Justice will do is we will come back to you, and we will tell you, take this off your referral base. Just do not provide this person with what's going to be a referral that's going to end up frustrating them in the end. Okay? So communicate with us. let us know and we'll bird dog. So, woof woof. Okay. All right. Item number 10. You are making a difference. We wanted to share this with you about if because I think that it may be hard to see, well, does this training really make any difference? Is it, and hopefully from what I'm hearing from everyone anecdotally is, we really enjoy the materials and we know a lot better more, and sometimes we're reading some of the book out to a caller and things like that. So, I mean, anecdotally that tells us that it's working and being effective. But in the end, it's about numbers, and everybody wants to know numbers. So recall, now I'm going back to Law Help MN. I mean, we started talking about lawhelpmn.org at the very first training in March of 2012. And in fact, we've had Law Help MN come to 211 to share information about databases. Our legal liaisons have had a presentation from lawhelpmn.org directly. And Call for Justice has been very active in promoting this with you, and we have watched the numbers on the taxonomy on your call referrals, how the call number referrals for Law Help have changed. They have gone up over 700% since we started our training with 211. But for me, the more interesting, I mean, that's very interesting information, but for me, the even more interesting information is what you have on page 6 of the training materials. And the key here is examining the numbers for Law Help websites, lawhelpmn.org website visits, counting the number of visitors who go to that website. And from the time period of June of 2012 to June of 2013, the number of visits increased from 101,000 to 169,000. That is over a 60% increase of visits to lawhelpmn.org. I was in communication with the administrator for Law Help after I saw these numbers, and I said, I'd like to think that Call for Justice and its collaboration with 211 had something to do with that. And the response back was, it sure did. Your publicity for lawhelpmn.org has been crucial, that was the word, has been crucial in changing their numbers. The person who's responsible for overseeing funding for lawhelpmn.org and other legal-related, nonprofit legal-related resources has told me informally that she believes that we are almost single-handedly responsible for increasing these numbers. Now, that may be an exaggeration, okay? But it was nice to hear. And so if you have any doubt about this, okay, about the importance of your work and the importance of our work together as collaborators, don't doubt it anymore. These are real numbers, and I'm just sorry, that those are phenomenal increases in 1 year for a website. So continue to make the referrals, and I have this thing I call the ripple effect, that you never know when you do something, where it will ripple to. And we have found in a year and a half that the ripples are places that we never expected, okay? This is an example of rippling, and it's a great example. So that, and you have on page 7 our suggested script, all whole in part for your callers, but it's not a lot of words, and if you can develop the rote of trying to cover each of these points, I mean, you don't have to say it exactly how we have it here, but if you can cover the idea behind each of these points with each of your legal callers, I think that your callers are going to be way better off. I think the system will be way better off. And we're back to that process word. If this can become part of the process for our legal needs callers, I think it's crucial. It's an added value service that can have the ripple effects far more than what we can anticipate. Because if we can have people that better understand what to expect, there'll be less frustration, there may be more people using their imagination about how to navigate the system, and in the end, there may be more people being protected. Their legal, civil legal rights being protected. Anyone have any questions? Okay, well, last thing I want to say before we close is thank you, absolutely, for your hard work, and for your putting up a little bit with us, although we're fairly delightful, and, with you hanging in there, and all the questions that we've had in the past in our trainings. I think that our trainings as we go forward will continue to focus on legal topics, but we're going to expand a little bit. For example, in September, we'll be training on interview techniques. And we'll be bringing in some folks from Tubman who operate telephone advice, telephone screening systems. So stay tuned, and hopefully it will continue to be of value, and it'll continue to be interesting. So thank you very much.